as we discover 15 crazy things that used to be completely legal. Number 15. Mailing babies. The U.S. Postal Service introduced a new parcel service for its users, and while it was one of the best things to happen to the people, it also meant some crazy things were about to go down. They allowed people to send parcels weighing over 4 pounds through the service, and people decided to test its limits. Since it was a new service, there were no regulations on what could not be sent through the service. So a couple, in January 1913, took advantage of the opportunity. The Ohio couple mailed a very special delivery, their infant son. They paid 15 cents for his stamps and insured him for around $50 before handing him over to the mailman. Fortunately, they were not paying to get rid of their son. They just wanted him to go on a little trip to see his grandma, who was living a mile away. Was there any rule to not mail children through the postal service at the time? Actually, no. The only issue seemed to be that it was morally wrong. But morality, at the end of the day, depends on the people involved. But the couple from Ohio were not the last family to mail their children through the postal service. From 1913 to 1915, there were around 7 instances of other families mailing children. It wasn't a common practice, but it was cheaper than a passenger ticket on a train for a kid. Accepting humans as mail was finally banned in February 1914 after 5-year-old May Pierstorff was mailed to her grandparents' house 73 miles away. But the new law took full effect when a 6-year-old was mailed from Florida to Virginia over a distance of 720 miles. It was the longest postal trip of any of the children mailed, and it cost just 15 cents. If mailing children was still legal, grandparents would be receiving their grandkids at the slightest inconvenience. Number 14. Baby farms. You have probably heard of baby farms in the modern context, which are places that trafficked women and forced them to breed for adoption. In the 19th century context in the UK, it meant something else entirely. Back in the day, and even sometimes now, working-class women were doing unholy amounts of work that they didn't have time to take care of their children. Access to birth control was not easy or even possible, so their only option was to give their babies to daycare. But not regular daycare centers. These daycares didn't just look after the kids for 8 hours each day. The kids stayed there from when they were infants until they got older. You could say it was an orphanage, but for kids whose parents would come back for them. The cost of the baby farm was £30 monthly, which was equivalent to $3,800 in today's currency. In modern society, if anybody paid that much for a daycare, they would expect their kids to be looked after with utmost care and attention. But that was quite the contrary of what was going on in the baby farms. Because many women needed to make money to look after their families, it was a profitable business model. So the people running these places would take on more children than they could handle, which led to poor living situations for the children in their custody. The parents that hoped for their children to get a good life ended up losing many of them in their infancy to these baby farms. Something had to change. So the British government introduced the Infant Protection Act of 1872, which required child carers to register first and also undergo training. The law was further modified in 1897 to allow law enforcement officers to raid anywhere they suspected was still running baby farms and move the children there to a safer place. Number 13. Dangerous toy. It seems like back in the day, people were out for children, because mailing children and running baby farms are not everything that were normalized involving kids. One of the most mind-boggling legal things is this atomic energy lab. Parents these days take extra measures to make sure their kids are safe. Some even go as far as homeschooling just to make sure their kids don't interact with anyone or anybody potentially dangerous. But parents from back in the day seem to be doing everything to put their kids in harm's way. Because an average gift given to kids in the early 1950s was the Atomic Energy Lab toy that allowed kids to perform experiments with real radioactive materials. The kit contained a cloud chamber that allowed children to watch alpha particles in motion. Although the creator, Alfred Carlton Gilbert, claimed the kit didn't contain any dangerous materials, he gave one warning to the children who played with it. Don't break the seal on the 3 sample jars. The set sold for $49.50 at the time, which is equivalent to $640 in modern times. The toy did not sell more than 5,000 kits, and while some cited safety issues as the reason for the low sales, others claimed that it was because of its high price. It was a distasteful toy because who would want possible radioactive exposure for their children? The fact that the toy passed to reach shelves says a lot about the quality of child protection in the 1950s. It's a good thing toy makers are making better decisions now. Number 12. Smoking everywhere. If you were to be out at a restaurant now and saw somebody smoking, you would report to the staff. In some cases, you may even walk up to the culprit and pick an issue with them. But the culprit may tell you that smoking is their right. You would be right to force the person to stop, even if they may protest, but not in the 20th century. Back in the early 90s, it was completely normal to see people smoking in public spaces. And we are not talking about smoking in open-air spaces. Some of the places people could smoke were in the elevator, at restaurants and cinemas. People could smoke in hospitals, even pediatrician offices. This was the norm, because it was enabled back in the day. When smoking everywhere used to be legal, ashtrays were provided in every establishment. There were ashtrays in McDonald's, car repair shops, and airplane seats armrests. Cars came with them inbuilt, while luxury cars even offered ashtrays with lighters. With this constant provision for smokers, it makes us wonder what people's lungs looked like back then. Anyway, the same constant provision for smokers led to public health concerns. Secondhand smoking was proving to be more dangerous than actual smoking, which meant something had to change. In 1964, a Surgeon General's report on the negative effects of tobacco revealed how addictive it was and what it was doing to people's health. By 1970, some government spaces started to put up signs prohibiting public smoking. Then a law was passed that banned the advertisement of cigarettes on radio stations. Arizona was the first state to have some smoke-free public spaces, paving the way for other states to follow. Number 11. Texting and driving. Even if you were a golden child, you definitely got the talk that dissuaded you from texting and driving from an adult. But there was a time in human history when it was okay to text and drive. Well, there was no law supporting it, but there was also none against it. So if back in the day, a driver were to hit you with their car while texting, calling the police to intervene would have been a waste of time. What was worse was that, if the driver was richer than you, then you may be blamed for not being more careful while crossing the street. As more people started to use cell phones, more research on the dangers of distracted driving started to be conducted. When driving a light vehicle like a car, dialing on the phone could make you 2.8 times more likely to get in a crash. While for driving a heavier vehicle like a truck, dialing could make you 5.9 times more likely to get involved in a crash. Texting increased that chance by 23.2 more times. With these high numbers, it was only smart to stop that from happening. The one thing humans fear is punishment. And for drivers, they hate getting tickets and paying fines. So now whenever a person is caught texting and driving, they are stopped and written up. But it gets worse when the driver causes an accident that leads to an injury or death. They will face jail time of up to 5 years to 10 years, making you wonder if responding to that text is important. Number 10. Open immigration. Now that there is a lot of anger around immigration in the United States, it may be the perfect time to let you know that open immigration was legal. There was a time when people could decide to move to the US and they wouldn't have to go through multiple rounds of interviews. So how did it work, and why did it stop being legal? We all know America's history and how the natives were colonized before the country started existing. After the land was declared and turned into the country it is today, it was time to grow the economy. There was no way they could do it on their own, so America opened its borders. People from all parts of the world could come and set up businesses, pay taxes while working, and many more. It is the major reason why America is filled with different cultures. Anyway, the US government started to have an issue because they were seeing people from other nationalities succeed way more than their people. But that is what should be expected of immigrants, because nobody would leave their home to laze around in another man's land. The politicians didn't like that and started to cite long-term issues arising. So in order to curb the problem, America banned open immigration. Although US citizenship was only restricted to white people, they introduced a new law, the Immigration Act of 1924. The new law offered a limited number of visas to each nation. So if you wanted to migrate from a country that was allowed only 10 visas, once all those spots were filled up, there would be no hope for you. The world would have been overflowing with cultural integration if open immigration was still legal. Number 9. Underage marriage. We are back to strange things that were legal to do to children again. This time, it's underage marriage. There was a time in history when it was normal to see adult men get married to girls below the age of 15. And although the world has progressed, there are still many states that support child marriage in US, the Middle East, and Africa. At some point in time, there were so many older men marrying minors. That number is still significantly high because from 2010 to 2018, over 300,000 minors were legally married. What's worse is that there are still 38 states in the United States that have not banned child marriage. In places like Nigeria, northern girls get married when they are as young at the age of as 6, and by the time they are of childbearing age, which could be 12, they start having children. Minors who go through underage marriage suffer state-sanctioned statutory assault and are denied access to education. The crazy thing about this law is that the legal age is 18 years, but many states would do nothing when a person below that age gets married. The world just seems to be incredibly cruel to children. Number 8. Lobotomies. Although people are still largely misinformed on mental illnesses and how it affects people, back in the day, it was worse. Sometimes conditions that were not mental illnesses were treated as such. A treatment was proposed. Lobotomy. So what is a lobotomy, and how was the procedure carried out? A lobotomy was a medical procedure that severed the connection between the prefrontal cortex and anterior part of the brain. It was done to alleviate the symptoms of mental illnesses like depression, but it did quite the opposite. In fact, it was so ineffective that the doctor who invented it is still facing controversy many years after he has passed. Before the surgery, the patients would be trained on basic life skills and other things that they would need to navigate life after the surgery. But almost no patient that went through the surgery ever used the training they were offered. After the surgery, the patients would lose their ability to think and their personality. In 1941, the former President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, had a sister who underwent a lobotomy. Instead of the procedure solving her psychiatric problems, it led to cognitive and physical impairments, which made her stay in institutions for the rest of her life. After this incident, people started to push back against lobotomies, and it was finally banned in the 1960s. The last lobotomy in the United States was performed in 1967, and it resulted in the patient's death. Since then, people have been relying on antipsychotic medications, and when it's bad, the psychiatry surgeries that are carried out are not as bad as lobotomies. Number 7. Drunk driving. The concept of drinking and driving doesn't sound sensible now, but about a century ago, it was completely normal to meet drunk people behind the steering wheel cruising through the street. Before 1910, it would have been a waste of time to report them because it was never a crime. A sad, heartbroken alcoholic could get drunk and just hop in their vehicle and drive for as long as they wanted. Unlike now, when you have to either call a designated driver or order a ride to go home once you have taken 2 shots. However, drunk driving accident cases were becoming an issue. It was not fair to endanger the lives of pedestrians, so a change was needed. It started with New York. In 1910, the state of New York banned drunk driving and California followed suit. but the law became more effective after the age of 21 was set as the minimum drinking age. After the National Minimum Drinking Age Act was implemented, all 50 states in the United States banned drunk driving in 1988. The fact that people had to be told not to drink and drive before not doing it makes us wonder how the world would be without laws. Number 6. Narcotics. These days, we judge people a lot for using narcotics. But the only reason we are able to do that is because it accidentally became illegal. Opium, marijuana, Vicodin, codeine, cocaine, and the likes were completely legal to use. People didn't have to go to dark alleyways to purchase them. Dealers could legally purchase narcotics and sell them openly. Many people were heavily reliant on these drugs back in the day, but it became illegal after President Woodrow Wilson passed a law that was supposed to regulate the trade of narcotics. Drugs became a problem in the United States after the Civil War era. U.S. citizens were looking for the rush that came with the war, but also any semblance of stability. The country was going through rapid urbanization, and the drug problem was getting worse, and something had to be done fast. President Woodrow Wilson wanted to solve the problem, so he passed the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. The law recognized opiates and coca leaf as narcotics, and only permitted their usage within a medical setting. Higher taxes were placed on the importation of these products to raise the prices so less people would be able to afford it. Although less people can now afford drugs, there's still a significant percentage of people using illegal narcotics in the United States. There is already a fentanyl problem in the United States, and it's illegal. Imagine how much worse it would be if other narcotics were legal to use. Number 5. Radithor. When you think you have heard the strangest outlawed thing, something else like Radithor comes along. Radithor was a patented medicine that contained radioactive substances and was marketed as a cure to multiple ailments. Marie Curie died after radioactive exposure, and she didn't ingest it. Now imagine what people who ingested Radithor passed through. Radithor was distilled water that contained radium-226 and 228 isotopes. It was sold in half-ounce bottles, and it was, unsurprisingly, a commercial success. Introduced in 1918, this medication sold 400,000 bottles between 1925 and 1930. It was manufactured by the Bailey Radium Laboratories in New Jersey. The owner of the lab was William J. A. Bailey, and he was, wait for it, a dropout from Harvard College. He wasn't a medical doctor, talk less of a medical student. He advertised Radithor as a cure for the living dead and perpetual sunshine. The product cost $1 at the time, which is equivalent to $18 in 2025. It claimed to cure impotence, which encouraged a certain socialite to make a purchase. In 1927, a wealthy socialite, athlete, industrialist, and Yale College graduate bought 1,400 bottles of Radithor. He was probably their highest buyer, but ended up being the one who suffered the most. He consumed all 1,400 bottles and developed various cancers. It was so bad that his jaw had to be removed. When he finally died in 1932, he had to be buried in a lead-lined coffin because of how radioactive he was. His body was exhumed in 1965 for a study, and he was measured at 225,000 becquerels. Bayer's death led to the strengthening of the FDA's powers as they couldn't ban Radithor before then. It also led to the demise of most radiation-based patent medicines. Number 4. Polygamy. If you like more than one person and wish you could be with them all at the same time, it would have been easier to do in the late 19th century. Polygamy used to be a normal way of life, especially amongst Africans and other indigenous communities. It was legal to have more than one wife in the United States until the 1882 Edmunds Act was passed. Based on the Edmunds Act, a person could be fined or face imprisonment for up to 5 years if they are found guilty of marrying a new person when their previous spouse is not dead or they aren't legally divorced. Although polygamy is not prosecuted at the federal level, There are state laws that are against the practice. So what exactly caused this law to even be suggested in the first place? It was because of the Mormons. The first law passed to discourage polygamy started in Utah. A law was passed that any Utah man who had more than one wife would not be able to own land in the territory. Some House of Representatives members argued that the government could not determine what was moral or not, so it didn't pass. In 1862, the Morrill Anti-Bigamy Act was introduced. The act criminalized the practice of polygamy and unincorporated the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint and limited their real estate holdings. Number 3. Incest. While we are still talking about illegal marriages, let's talk about incest. Incest has always been treated as a cultural norm. In some places like Egypt, marriage between siblings or cousins was not seen as a big deal and was, in fact, encouraged. But there was a problem. Children born by incest tend to have developmental issues and rare genetic conditions. The only way to prevent this issue from recurring was to criminalize incest. In 48 states in the United States, incest between consenting adults is criminalized with culprits facing 10 years in most states. In New Jersey and Rhode, incest between two consenting adults, that is from the age of 16 to 18, is not criminalized. In Ohio, incest is not criminalized as long as a parental figure is not involved. Although incest is not criminalized in New Jersey and Rhode, marriage between both parties is not allowed. Apart from the law criminalizing incest, an issue of morality is raised. You can love your family members, but what exactly would make anyone want to be legally hitched to a sibling or cousin? There are no possible answers to these questions, so it's best to avoid them. Number 2. Prostitution. This may come as a shock, but prostitution used to be legal in the United States. Prostitution is the oldest profession in the world, and the majority of the people who used to offer the service were white women. When it appeared that they were not welcome into the corporate world to compete against their male counterpart, they turned towards sex work. So why exactly did it become illegal? The major reason for the illegality of prostitution is based on the premise that it is exploitative and sex workers are usually demeaned. If it becomes legalized, the exploitation and mistreatment of the workers would become worse and aid pimps. According to lawmakers, there is no way legalizing prostitution would protect women against violence, especially in a world that judges women that don't even sell sex. In 1910, American politicians saw the large number of white people involved in prostitution and decided that the only way to stop it was by passing an act against white slavery. It was called the Mann Act, and it prohibited the interstate transport of women for immoral purposes. Number 1. Slavery and segregation. And while white people were concerned about how they were being perceived for being involved in prostitution, it was legal for people of color to be enslaved. Up until 1865, it was legal for people to buy other humans and enslave them, forcing them to work in plantations, cotton farms, and other places with no access to a good standard of living. Slave owners were taking trips and spending weeks at sea to go to other people's lands and traffic them. Then when they brought them to the U.S., they were exposed to inhumane conditions as they worked tirelessly. The people that suffered the most at the hands of U.S. imperialism was Africa. After millions of dead slaves and various slave revolts, slavery was finally abolished in 1865. But the freedom given to slaves was almost insignificant at the start because racism was not hidden and segregation was born. The former slaves that were now free were relegated to low-quality lands and deprived of resources for growth. It was almost like they were getting punished for wanting freedom. Although it took multiple landmarks, segregation officially ended in 1965 in the United States. Which of these old legal laws shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. For more fun facts and interesting pieces of history, make sure you subscribe to our channel.